Happy birthday to Carrie. Carrie by Stephen King was published on April 5th, 1974. So in this video, I want to celebrate Carrie and celebrate Stephen King. And I thought that I would do this by reading a poem from Claire C. Holland's collection, I Am Not Your Final Girl, and then to share a portion of my thesis where I talk about the amazing, powerful Carrie White. So, this is Carrie, and this is from Claire C. Holland's collection, I Am Not Your Final Girl. In a world where fathers reign like dark clouds casting shadows from the skyline, are all of us daughters doomed to become our mothers? To string ourselves up, martyrs on the doorframe, pricked with knives and other utensils used yesterday for making dinner? Or maybe that's how we kill it, the impulse to serve and say sorry all the time. It's exhausting, all this Mary stuff, all this blood and sin piled on us without our permission. Intuition is treated like a curse because it's not dense and sturdy as a man's thick fist. They don't like something that slips through fingers like water. But what good are we cast in white? I'd rather arm myself in blood than be a pretty statue to stare at. So let's talk about my thoughts on Carrie White. Carrie embodies this liminal space between girlhood and womanhood. In the opening of Carrie, she is terrified when she starts her first menstrual cycle because she has no idea what is happening. She thinks she is dying. At the same time, however, Carrie exhibits a strengthening of her telekinetic powers, thereby depicting the dichotomous nature of blood symbolism in the novel. As Beauvoir writes, menstrual blood embodies the essence of femininity, which is why its flow endangers woman herself, whose mana is thus materialized. With the onset of menstruation, Carrie embodies both the fear and power associated with womanhood. And on writing, Stephen King reflects on the symbolism of blood in Carrie, writing, "The blood in Carrie seemed more than just splatter to me. It has to mean something. That meaning wasn't consciously created." Although King may not have initially set out to infuse the blood in Carrie with deeper symbolic meaning, once he began to explore the concept more deeply, he realized that, this is the quote, "the significance of all that blood was hard to miss," prompting him to play with the idea, image, and emotional connotations of blood, end quote. One connotation of blood that King explores in the character of Carrie is the connection between blood and womanhood. As King writes in On Writing once again, for young women, blood is associated with reaching physical maturity and the ability to bear children. For Carrie, however, whose mother, Margaret, never explained menstruation to her, menstrual blood equals death. As Carrie transitions into womanhood, she is experiencing a mingling of horror with fear. A large part of this fear is due to her abusive mother. Carrie's transition from girlhood to womanhood through the symbol of menses and her newly awakened power threatened the hierarchical nature of her relationship with her mother, Margaret. Hence, for Margaret, the onset of Carrie's menses is not only a symbol of uncleanliness, but also evidence that Carrie no longer, this is a quote from Julia Kristeva's Powers of Horror, Carrie no longer respects borders, positions, or rules, and as a result will disturb identity, system, and order. Margaret knows that her power over Carrie will be diminished once Carrie reaches womanhood. Therefore, it is not only Margaret's extreme religious beliefs about women's impurity that drive her abusive behavior toward Carrie, but it is also her fear of losing her authoritative hold over Carrie. Because of this fear, Margaret uses increasingly extreme measures to keep Carrie from embracing her awakening power. Nevertheless, after Carrie gets her first period, Carrie defiantly stands up to her mother by refusing to go into the prayer closet and repent of her womanhood. She brazenly screams at Margaret, "You suck. You fuck." And that is from Carrie on page 70 in my edition. Although Carrie is eventually whirled into the closet head first by Margaret, she later begins to remember the fear in Mama's eyes and thinks she knows the reason why. At this point, Carrie begins to realize that she has the power to break free from her mother. Margaret believes, and here is a quote from Kristeva, and also this contains a quote from Stephen King's Carrie. Margaret believes feminine temptation is the brimming flesh of sin's root and basic representation, telling Carrie that they must pray to Jesus for their woman-weak, wicked, sinning souls, and making Carrie repeat statements such as, "Eve was weak and loosed the raven on the world, and the raven was called sin, and the first sin was intercourse." Carrie has endured this type of abuse from her mother for her entire life. As a child, Carrie is told by Margaret that good girls don't get breasts, or in Margaret's terminology, dirty pillows. Nevertheless, the more Carrie embraces her power, the further she transgresses the boundaries of her mother's belief systems. She begins to contemplate her body and her femininity in a newly enlightened way. Seeing herself in this new way, Carrie thinks her legs are actually pretty, and she could fix her hair and buy pantyhose and blue and green tights and make little skirts and dresses from butterick and simplicity patterns. This is a quote directly from Carrie. After years of seeing her body as ugly and unclean, Carrie now views her body as the promise of happiness, a work of art, a living statue. Hence, she longs to shape it, adorn it, display it. And that is a quote from Beauvoir. As Carrie continues to bask in her newfound freedom by defiantly getting ready to attend the prom, Margaret continually tries to guilt Carrie into staying home through religious and misogynistic manipulation, stating, "I can see your dirty pillows. Everyone will. They'll be looking at your body. The book says," and then Margaret goes into launch what the book says. However, Carrie refuses to listen to any more of her mother's tirade. Instead, Carrie cuts Margaret's statement short with a bold reply. "Those are my breasts, Mama. Every woman has them." Rather than submitting to Margaret's authority and continuing to hide her body in shame, Carrie now embraces her womanhood and feels empowered by her burgeoning femininity. Because of Margaret's distorted theological views about the so-called sin of sexual intercourse, she views Carrie as the embodiment of sin, a physical punishment for her participation in sexual acts. For this reason, Margaret's initial plan is to kill Carrie as soon as she is born, an act which Margaret believes will cleanse her of her sin. However, because Margaret fails to follow through with killing newborn Carrie, she then spends the rest of her life rejecting the role of a nurturing parent and becoming an abusive authoritarian. She indoctrinates Carrie with extremely misogynistic views and harmful religious beliefs. Margaret also physically assaults Carrie on numerous occasions, ultimately leading to the final confrontation that ends with her and Carrie's deaths. When Carrie returns home from the prom, Margaret is prepared to follow through with killing her, stating, "I got a knife, this knife, and waited for you to come so I could make my sacrifice. But I was weak and backsliding. I took this knife in hand again when you were 3, and I backslid again. So now the devil has come home." Although Carrie eventually dies from the stab wound Margaret inflicts on her, she first uses her powers to end her tormentor's life. As Margaret dies, she prays, "Thy kingdom come, thy will be done." To which Carrie boldly replies, "My will, Mama." With these words, Carrie clearly communicates that she is now in control of the situation. Because Carrie's abuse extends beyond the borders of her home, so too does her vengeance. Margaret's abuse and harmful brand of religion lead to Carrie's social awkwardness and isolation. Therefore, Carrie is unable to form friendships or participate in society in a healthy way, and her peers view her as an outcast. For this reason, Carrie is subjected to extensive bullying throughout her entire school career. As Madden writes, each of the ways in which Carrie differs from her peers contributes to her status as witch and scapegoat. The novel's opening incident in the girls' locker room is a continuation of the torment endured by Carrie over the course of several years. Her peers have taunted her since early school years, as evidenced by, this is a quote from Carrie, by the graffiti scratched on a desk of the Barker Street Grammar School in Chamberlain. Carrie White eats shit. Carrie has long been viewed as an outcast, and her ignorance about menstruation fully fuels further torment from her peers. As Madden writes, Carrie's extremely public failure to keep her menstrual blood contained within the body breaks social taboos and undoubtedly contributes to her demarcation as an abject figure, further isolating her from her peers. Feeling disgust rather than empathy for Carrie, the other girls in the locker room berate Carrie by throwing feminine hygiene products at her and chanting, "Plug it up, plug it up." Thus, Carrie is ostracized from her peers even further by this incident, as each girl taunts her for her ignorance about menstruation and her failure to understand how to properly contain the flow of her menstrual blood. Although all of the girls participate in Carrie's locker room torment, Chris Hargison is the ringleader and the first to taunt Carrie by yelling, "Period." Chris's bullying of Carrie goes beyond this moment too, because Chris refuses to acknowledge any wrongdoing and will not accept the alternate punishment for her actions. She is banned from attending the prom. Chris blames Carrie for the negative consequences of her own actions, so she seeks revenge by dumping a bucket of pig's blood on Carrie after Carrie is chosen in a rigged vote as prom queen. However, this plan backfires on the entire town, not just on Chris, as Carrie turns the tables on all of her tormentors. No longer the victim, Carrie has become a monstrous hero. Feminism has given a language to her victimization and a new force to the anger that subsidizes her own act of horrific revenge. That is a quote from Carol Clover in Men, Women, and Chainsaws. After a lifetime spent being a victim, Carrie finally harnesses all of her power to retaliate against her oppressors, thereby transforming into, a quote from Madden, an uncontrollable female endowed with unholy powers, who breaks free of the margins to which she has been confined. As Cixous explains, when the repressed of their culture and their society returns, it's an explosive, utterly destructive, staggering return, with a force never yet unleashed and equal to the most forbidding of suppressions. Hence, the level of Carrie's retaliation can be viewed as equal to the level of torment she has experienced. No longer cowering in fear, Carrie instead revels in her destructive nature. In her final moments, Carrie embraces the label of witch as it relates to feminine power. Rather than becoming, as Clover argues, the devil's portal as a result of her pain and rage, Carrie instead, I argue, channels this pain and rage into a courageous, although deadly, destruction of the systems that have long oppressed and abused her. In overcoming her own internalized misogyny and fear of her abusers, Carrie becomes a catalyst for disrupting an abusive patriarchal ideology. Happy birthday, Carrie. A list of the works I cited in this video will be included in the description box for your further reading and research. Once again, thank you for watching. Happy birthday, Carrie White.